Empire Silence. Finally, is all I have to say. Finally, I got to this book. I've been wanting to start this series for like 3 years, and I just keep kicking that can down the road, and I finally got to it. So, now, having gotten to the series, is this the 5-star book, 10 out of 10, perfect experience that everyone on BookTube seems to say that it is? Not exactly. Not quite. Now, do not get me wrong, this is a very good book, and it is an excellent start to a series. We've got young noble-born boy in a galactic empire that's at war with an alien race. But first, before we can do all that, we have to establish the world that this is going to take place in and the main character that we will follow, right? Good stuff. It's just not perfect. And to be honest, it is wildly entertaining, while at the same time being kind of inconsistent. It's also really fast-paced while feeling like we're going absolutely nowhere, at least for a big chunk of the middle of the book. It's kind of hard to explain exactly what I'm talking about without going into some spoilers, which I will do kind of at the end of the video, but it's not very many. It's just a couple key points that I want to make, and I will give you a heads up before I do that so I don't ruin anything for you. Anyway, speaking of inconsistencies, the characters are also kind of inconsistently written. There are going to be a few deaths in the story. Some of them are going to hit pretty hard, considering that the very minimal amount of time that we get with those characters, the development is just so stupendously done that you are pretty well invested in them by the time they go. And then there's some other characters that are not necessarily very well fleshed out or developed, so when they die, you're just kind of like, well, I guess that just happened. But if we're talking about characters, we also have to talk about Hadrian, who is easily one of the best parts of this entire book, is his character. But I feel like he should also come with a little bit of a warning label, because in the beginning of the book, he is extremely unlikable. So if for some reason you have a hard time engaging with a book that has an unlikable main character, you might struggle with about the first 150 pages of this book. But for me, watching the character change and grow and evolve over the course of the book was just wonderful. I enjoyed it. I think it was extremely well done, well handled, well managed. Everything about it was good, and we are just getting started. I mean, we haven't even seen the Empire and the Hadrian, the half-mortal, and the Sun Eater, and all the shit that he's supposed to become over the course of this. We haven't even scratched the surface of where this character is supposed to be going, and I already am just floored with the development and the way that it was done. Excellent. And you know what it reminds me of? Now, bear with me here. This is a slightly obscure reference. I don't know how many people's actually going to know where I'm going with this, but it reminds me of Dune. Not the book, not the movie, that old TV miniseries that aired back around the year 2000. That guy who played Paul Atreides in that was the most insufferably unlikable. Like, you just wanted to beat his head against the wall. You hated his character so much in the first hour of that miniseries, and by the time, I think it was the 3rd episode rolled around, and he has become the Kwisatz Haderach, and that actor is just crushing that role so hard that you just wanted to fist pump when he gave some of his speeches. That's what this kind of reminds me of. Like, he starts out Hadrian as just insufferable and unlikable, and by the time the end of the book comes around, you're like, all right, yeah, let's go, dude. Let's go. I just feel like if we continue down the path that we are currently on with Hadrian, this character growth could be truly something special. Now, shifting gears, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the references in here to other authors' works. Now, I am definitely not the first reviewer to bring this up, but Christopher Ruocchio wears his influences on his sleeve, like very, very much so. So much so that I could see it actually being off-putting for some people as they're getting into it. Now, let's be honest, there is no such thing as original storytelling. Every story that's been told over the past in 500 years has been influenced by, or a retelling of, or taken bits and pieces, or an amalgamation of other things. This one just feels a little bit more front and center than some of the other ones that I've read, like directly lifting the shields from Dune, like didn't even try and change them, or, you know, man at the end of his life telling his story from a prison cell, or specifically calling the planes in this Flyers, which is a direct lift from the Book of the New Sun, which I knew these things were going to pop up because I've watched a couple of interviews actually with Christopher Ruocchio, and I knew that he was such a big fan of the Book of the New Sun and put a bunch of those references in here. What did catch me off guard was when he dropped the reference to the Dome of Bright Carvings, and I was like, there is no way that that is a reference to Gormenghast. I'm just seeing things because I want to see them, because I literally just read that a couple months ago and I loved it so much that I had to actually go and make a video raving about how much I liked that book. But when he got to the point where he introduced Lady Fuchsia, I was like, holy fucking shit, that was a Gormenghast reference. I actually got pretty excited about that one. But then that made me wonder, because if I hadn't read that like 2 months ago, I never would have caught it. So that made me wonder how many other references he snuck in here that I didn't catch, you know? Then I wonder if all of the references in here are coming from authors and books and literary references, because there is a specific series of revelations and reveals that happens towards the end of the book that I felt like was lifted from a video game. So then I don't know. I'll get into that a little bit here in spoilers, but I'm just like, where all are these sources that he's kind of pulling from? I'm curious. And like I said, these are so front and center sometimes that it can be a little bit off-putting. Like I was even a little bit off-put at the beginning. I was like, man, that's very almost in your face. But it doesn't matter, because the story goes its own way, does its own thing, and then gets you so wrapped up mainly in Hadrian, the main character, and especially in the second half of this book. The second half of this book puts the foot on the accelerator, and I was floored. I was so invested, especially once some of those mysteries start happening, and the war with the Cielsen, and it's just, it was great. Very, very good. Then you combine that with all of the implications of where this is ultimately going with those teases that you get at the beginning of the book with, you know, all of the titles that he has, which just remind you of how much further we have to go with this. The amalgamation of things that he's kind of bundled together here for you was just extremely well done and really just makes you want to keep reading. Even with all of the little minor inconsistencies and flaws that you find throughout. But to be honest, this is the dude's first book that he's ever written. I'm just saying, it was extremely impressive, especially once you consider the fact that he's never written anything before, and he pretty well nailed it. Some missteps here and there. Anyway, I just want to clarify a couple of points that I made here, and I'm going to use spoilers to do it. So you might want to duck out here if you haven't read the book. But first, I want to give my rating, and I'm going to give this one an 8. I was thinking for most of the book, maybe the first 2 acts of the book, that it's probably a 7. You know, it's not like, not that that's a bad rating. That is a good book. 5 is average, 7 is a good book, but that ending, that whole third act, I just loved it so much. It was so investing, and so just that momentum really drags you through the end of the book and kind of slingshots you towards wanting to really grab the next one. Just so well done. It pulled the whole thing up from a 7 to an 8 for me. Really good third act. Also Hadrian. Let's not forget about him. His character, very well done. All right, now, like I was saying earlier when I said it's very inconsistent, and the beginning of the book is quite well done. It's mostly world building and introducing you to Hadrian and getting all that kind of out of the way. It's the next section, and the kind of the middle section of the book, that I found the hardest to get through. And that's the part where I said it feels like it's going a mile a minute while simultaneously going absolutely nowhere. And it's about the time where Hadrian gets on a ship and we're like, oh, we're going to X. And the next scene is like he wakes up in an alley and you're like, something went wrong. We're not there. And now he's homeless and living in an alley. But wait, not anymore, because now he's a gladiator fighting in the Colosseum. But wait, not anymore, because now he's the prisoner of a royal family in a gilded cage. You're like, what is even happening here? It's like pulling you in so many different directions at the same time, or in rapid succession that it feels like all this crazy amounts of stuff is happening while you're literally, in the bigger grand scheme of the plot, literally going nowhere. And I wasn't sold on that section of the book. I wasn't sold on the way it was done or the way it was written. I was just like, it was a little bit of a drag to get through that section. And maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my personal nitpick. And maybe you'll get through it just fine and be like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. That section was my favorite part. I don't know. I just thought it kind of dragged down the book a little bit for me. And then there's the character development that I was talking about. You have some deaths and other things that happen, like Gibson doesn't actually die, but he gets punished for the things that he does to help out Hadrian, and he's exiled or whatever happens to Gibson. But his character was extremely well developed, and you felt so much for him right off the jump that when he's taken in, even though you could see it coming from a mile away, you knew this wasn't going to work. You knew somehow this was going to come down on Gibson's head and not Hadrian's. It was telegraphed pretty well. You still felt for him when they bring him in. Then, on the flip side of that, there's Kat. And she is a character that comes in and Hadrian kind of is friends with, and she ends up dying in the gutters of this city. And it feels like something that I'm supposed to feel more for her, but I didn't care for her at all. I mean, it wasn't that she was a bad character. It was just that I don't feel like she was developed to the point where I had any investment in her whatsoever. So when she died, I was just like, there you go. That's the thing that happened, and we move on. And I didn't think much of it until the end of the book when Hadrian looks back on her and he like remembers Kat fondly, and the way he remembers her, it feels like it's supposed to be symbolized as an impactful, meaningful moment in his life. And I'm like, he sure remembers Kat more fondly than I did, and he surely feels like the death of that character was more impactful to him as it was to me as a reader when it happened, because I sure was like, okay, moving on to the Colosseum. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, either way, the point is, with the very minimal amount of time that we got with a lot of these characters, some I thought were handled extremely well, and others I just had, anyway, and then moving on to the aliens. And this I just didn't want to spoil because it was probably my favorite part of the book. It was the most engaging part for me. Like I said, that third act when we really got into what's going on with the aliens and everything like that. But this is also the section where it felt like he was pulling influences directly from a video game. Because we're following the human race. The human race is at war with an alien species. While we're at war with these people, we are also investigating ancient ruins from a completely different alien species that is so ancient that they predate us. Then we are interested in these ruins for a very different reason than the aliens, because the alien species is extremely religious and just wants to go there for religious purposes, in this book's case, to pray. Now, I am not saying that plotline was lifted directly from the game Halo. All I'm saying is that if in the next book the flood comes running out of one of these ruins, I will not be surprised. And if I ever have the chance to have a conversation with Mr. Ruocchio, I will be sure to ask him. Anyway, everybody, as always, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.